Thank you very much, Alan. Thank you to you and to Ed for hosting this lecture today. And you just informed me that this house used to be the home of Gladstone. I think he lived in number 10, and then there's number 11.
No, he lived here.
He lived here at number 11. Okay. Well, I'm familiar with number 10 and number 11. How that works. And you know, I'm aware also that there is another interesting gathering happening at 2 o'clock today. But in this gathering, I want to make the case today for progressive politics, rejecting a populism of the left as the answer to the populism of the right, and instead embracing a unifying economic and social message driven from the center. But at this moment, it would be bizarre not to start with the issue which has divided our nation so much, Brexit. And I begin actually by praising the Prime Minister. She has striven hard from good intention with a poor hand, a party divided, disputatious and dogmatic in equal degrees, which then gave her an impossible circle to square. A frictionless border in Ireland, exit of the UK from the European Single Market and Customs Union, and yet Northern Ireland in the same relationship to Europe as the rest of the UK. This literally and technically cannot be done. So I sympathize with her. But nothing can disguise the nature of the deal she has chosen, if reports of it are true. This deal isn't a compromise, it's a capitulation. The withdrawal agreement will keep us tied to EU trade policy until there is an end established by joint consent. In other words, the EU has a veto. Now, it's coated the deal in heavy fudge, but that is the inedible biscuit beneath the coating. As for future arrangements, that is essentially the Chequers proposal, which leaves us accepting existing EU rules and agreeing to abide by future ones. This is Brexit in theory, but still tied to Europe in reality, thus making a mockery of the reason for leaving. And whatever people voted for, it surely wasn't this. How did we arrive here? Because Theresa May wanted to unify the country after Brexit had so bitterly divided it. And this is the right ambition, and even a noble one. But the route she chose, stay in step with Europe's rules whilst leaving the political structures of decision-making, is a dead end. It hasn't united the two sides of the Brexit debate, except in opposition to the deal. Remainers like me, leavers like Boris Johnson, are now in unholy alliance. We agree this is a pointless Brexit in name only, which is not the best of a bad job, but the worst of both worlds. In the cause, indeed, of taking back control, we lose the control we had. And it won't end the argument. It will perpetuate disunity, dragging us past March 2019 into a blind alley strewn with further and further rounds of negotiation, when we will have lost whatever leverage we had, and with the battle still being waged by those who want to stay close to Europe in the hope of one day rejoining, and those who want to break from Europe and forge a new future. So this is the time for Remainers and Leavers to come together and understand there is only one way of ending the argument and reuniting the country. The only route to unity is clarity, and the only route to clarity is through the people. Parliament must ask the British people to resolve the matter, to reconsider, to clarify their mandate, to do so in a vote which is accepted by all sides as conclusive, to give each side a chance to remake their case on the basis not of claim and counterclaim, but of the experience of the past 30 months, and to give Europe a chance to reconsider their offer to the British people after 30 months, which has also seen the politics of Europe change dramatically, particularly on the issue of immigration. So I know it is said that a new vote of the people will also divide, but a reconsideration, in the light of all we now know, accepted by all as the final word, especially if accompanied by a new willingness on the part of Europe's leadership and Britain's to deal with the reasons for the Brexit decision, this is the only hope of unity in the future. And it is, frankly, gut-wrenching for me that this call is not being led by Labour as it should be. However, Brexit is but one example of how populism is all the rage. Forgive me for wearing my specs for this next bit, but all right, I can see you all now. Yeah, very nice you are too. Not only in Europe, as with Poland or Hungary, and in the surge of outsider populist parties from Italy to Germany, or just look at Brazil or the Philippines, or indeed the United States. Populism is everywhere. By contrast, according to the prevailing political wisdom, the politics of the progressive centre has gone out of fashion. But it never was a fashion. It was a philosophy. And it remains as relevant as it was and as it always will be. Of course, the philosophy must be applied today differently for radically different times. But when people say it has been rejected, the truth is, at least here in the UK, it's not recently been on offer. Furthermore, it has been systematically assaulted not only from the right but from the left. The denigration of the Labour Party record in government and its designation by the far left as neoliberal is one of the most absurd and self-defeating caricatures of modern political history. The excellent pamphlet that's published by Glenn O'Hara this morning, analysing the record of the last Labour government, demonstrates this conclusively. And the Labour Party has paid, but more importantly, the country has paid a heavy price for this stupidity. It has undermined the achievements of the party in government. It's weakened the Labour Party's ability to win by depriving it of a unifying message which can reach the centre ground, and it's led to the abject refusal of the Labour leadership to lead the country out of the Brexit nightmare. What is true, however, is that if progressive centrist politics is to be revived, it requires change. Defining populism is hard. We feel we know it when we see it, though it's important not to describe everything that is popular as populist. As the recent paper of my institute shows, there are some shared characteristics. It's politics pitched as outsiders taking on the elite. It claims to be the only authentic voice of the people. It does not simply cause division, it exalts in it. And its policies are foremost designed for emotional rather than rational appeal. Opposition to it is seen not as democratic disagreement, but as treachery. Disentangling the causes of populism is tricky. In Western politics, the most obvious explanation seems the combination of stagnating incomes post-financial crisis and cultural alienation through immigration. Social media, with its attachment to hyperbole, its tendency to conspiracy theory and debate by headline, provides a platform of engagement for these messages of anger. The fragmentation of conventional media plays its part, as the traditional media decide their best hope of commercial salvation lies in identifying a constituency and keeping it in a permanent echo chamber of outrage. In non-Western countries, populism seems to be an explosion of anger at the inability of the established politicians to deliver change, and also at corruption. But in all these cases around the world, the common factors are the insistence that things must change and the belief it requires a strongly disruptive force to achieve the change. So progressive parties associated with the status quo, they fare badly. And to that extent, the leftist critique of moderate social democracy is correct. Such parties seem hopelessly out of tune with the sounds of the age. So you go around Europe, and it's a pretty sorry story for conventional social democrats. The French Socialist Party, having won the election and the presidency in 2012, is now almost defunct. The German SPD is at its lowest level ever. Moderate centre-left governments were put out of power in Italy, Holland, Sweden, and Austria. Spain's Socialist Party is in government, but is yet to win an election. And Portugal offers a ray of satisfaction, but overall you have to say the position is bleak. And this in turn has opened the door to a renaissance of the far left. This takes the form either, as with the British Labour Party, of a takeover of a mainstream party, or as with Podemos in Spain and Mélenchon in France, of renewed or new radical leftist movements. This is the Sanders strain of thinking in US politics. Candidates are standing in American politics as socialists, a word that I can tell you was literally anathema for any would-be USA politician 20 years ago. And there are certain common themes in this new wave of old leftism. Back in vogue is a bigger state, promises of things like university education for free, higher taxes on the wealthy, disdain for much of the business community, especially in the financial sector, a more isolationist foreign policy, combined with a skepticism, if not renunciation, of traditional Western alliances. There is support for the new environmental politics, it's true, but that support, to be fair, is across the spectrum of progressive thinking. And then there's a new devotion to the causes of what is sometimes called left identity politics. Strong support for minorities, LGBT, transgender issues, and a willingness to embrace the politics of protest in a way that's full-on and unequivocal. This all mirrors a profound change in the sociological makeup of Western society, which is throwing up new coalitions of political support. Identity politics is displacing the politics of class. So the right-wing populism proclaims that national identity is under threat, principally from immigration, but also from what it calls political correctness and the left's embrace of minority rights. Thus, there is a new right-wing coalition of lower-income people who used to vote left on economic issues and higher-income people who hate government, favor deregulation, and voted right on economic issues. This is the Trump, Brexit, Salvini coalition. Steve Bannon is the ideological guru of it, and its intellectual coherence, by the way, is not to be underestimated. On the other hand, the disposition of the electorate to entertain leftist policies is probably greater today than for decades. In insecure times, the state seems a better protector of the people. A large public sector knows it's under siege from austerity and reform. And the left's got its own version of identity politics, reflecting a modern-day belief that an individual's identity, whether around gender, sexuality, ethnicity, is the most important thing to them and defines their place in society. This leads to a left coalition of older people attached to traditional leftist positions around the state, tax and spending, government control of business, and so on, and younger people who feel oppressed by society's conventional norms and power relationships. Parts of the left resemble the populist right. They too demonize opponents. They too consider themselves the true representatives of the people, waging war against elites who are only interested in self-preservation. All of this then causes a deep fissure across progressive politics, because the moderates suffer from being moderate. They seem flabby in the face of the scale of social injustice. They're always temporizing and compromising. And the leftists then sweep them aside, and in an age where noise and clamor easily overwhelm quiet persuasion, seem much more relevant, and particularly to the youth, much more attractive. But note that in nearly all cases, the populism which wins the power to govern is from the right. There are populist parties available on the left, not least the Corbyn Labour Party, but they seldom win power. Greece, possibly Mexico are the only examples, and even they need heavy qualification. So when we come to analyze the correct strategy to counter the populism, we should recognize one stark reality. Virtually everywhere in the West, progressive politics is in opposition. Even the midterm elections in the US, though they yielded big Democrat advance in the House and in certain states, they didn't deliver the resounding rejection of the president, which according to the critique of Donald Trump, should have happened. This is a president subject to a more coruscating onslaught than any in living memory. Yet, if you go to the US and you pose the question, could he win again in 2020? Few say he couldn't. It's not to say he will, just to point out that he could. In Britain, we have a government that's in complete disarray, making a mess of the most significant decision this country has taken since the war. Yet, the Labour Party is barely ahead in opinion polls, and its leadership's ratings actually languish well behind those of the Prime Minister, who herself faces daily speculation about her position and is highly unlikely to lead them into the next election. Of course, there is Macron, but in a sense, that's my point. He won precisely by not being from the conventional left. So, the challenge is that neither strain of traditional progressive politics, the more moderate sort, or that much further to the left, looks capable at this moment of defeating the populist right. And the risk for the moderate progressive politics is that in the ensuing tug of war with the far left, it's dragged into a strategic no man's land. However, these two new coalitions don't represent everyone. There is another coalition in the making. This is of people who are socially liberal, believe in social justice, believe enterprise is an important engine of economic progress, who want a state which supports, nurtures, and empowers the individual, with a special concentration on the most disadvantaged. But this group, what you might call the progressive center, instinctively dislikes the identity politics of left or right, abhors the divisive rhetoric, and reaches instead for a unifying social and economic message. Now, contemporary conventional wisdom will tell you this coalition can't prevail, but it's wrong. Right-wing populism does not offer an answer to an interdependent world, neither in its targeting of immigrants, nor in its isolationism, nor most of all in its divisiveness, which over time pulls a country apart, and no country is stronger when divided in this way. But the leftist populism, as well as the obvious point that it isn't a path to winning, will ultimately lead to dissolution, because though it often raises the right questions, it gives answers that have been tried and failed in the past. And it also divides and delegitimizes the opposition. Both forms of populism, in the end, do not equip people to deal with the world of change, but offer the false prospectus that change can be avoided. Both, however, do have one major element of appeal. Both recognize the widespread feeling that people have lost control of their future, that it's being determined by forces they've never consented to, culturally and economically. Therefore, to win, the progressive center must build out from that core coalition to peel off voters from the other two. And its starting point has to be to deal with the anxieties fueling the populism, to recognize the anger as genuine, to acknowledge the grievances as legitimate, not to dismiss them as invalid, and to meet people halfway at least. For example, we should willingly advocate immigration control, not to pander to anti-immigrant sentiment, but recognizing you don't have to be anti-immigrant to be worried if there are no effective rules controlling who has the right to be in our country. We need greater restrictions on European freedom of movement in the light of our experience of it, a new electronic form of identity to restore faith in our migration system, and credible mechanisms to restore Europe's borders. All these things are not inconsistent with progressive values that are actually necessary to protect them. Again, we should support measures of social liberalism. But if we pursue the politics of identity with intolerance towards those who are struggling with our interpretation of it, don't be surprised if they look for defenders of their views who are equally intolerant. Likewise for Europe, if Europe ignores the desire of European people to keep their own identity as nations, even as they freely cooperate for the common good, European leaders will lose support, and they'll mistake such attitudes as reactionary when they express only a natural sense of belonging. In the same way, we must give answers to the legitimate questions from the left, focusing policy and resources on those left behind, and satisfying the public insistence on changed corporate responsibility and governance, especially in areas like payment of taxes and treatment of the workforce. Populism thrives on the politics of fear. It's always looking for someone or something to blame. But the fear usually derives from a worry that's real, so you have to deal with it. After that, the task is to create a new policy agenda, a new narrative, which can replace the fear about the future with hope. Now, the spirit with which we approach this task is the same as it's always been: a passion for social justice, a belief that unless we act collectively together to provide it, inequality and inequity will persist and deepen. And these are the principles you then have to apply to a changing world. So the really important question is, okay, if there's a changing world, what's the nature of the change? All the traditional questions of macro and microeconomics, social welfare, public services, security, all of these remain. And there's much policy work to be done in order to reshape policy in a way that produces fairness and prosperity. But I would like to suggest to you that the key to understanding this changing world is the ongoing and accelerating technological revolution. Progressive politics is missing the true significance of this revolution. It's changing everything. And the first group of politicians to master its effects and weave its changes into a vision of how economy and society should best be transformed, they will own the politics of the foreseeable future. You know, when I left office, technology was important, but it seemed if you were in government that it was like any other issue. Okay, you had health, you had education, law and order, defense, and then you had technology. Today, technology and the next set of changes, artificial intelligence, automation, quantum computing, they are going to mean disruption to every single facet of life. For public services, there will be the opportunity to transform completely the way they work. For example, diagnosis and treatment in healthcare, or personalizing education for each child. The challenge for business today is going to be digitalization. For example, driverless vehicles will change transport, reconfigure car ownership, and of course they're going to remove jobs. And consequently, they'll alter the whole of the car industry. Virtually any job or any business could have a digital twin doing it differently. Now, there will be huge potential benefits, but there are going to be substantial changes in the labor market, displacement of existing ways of working, and many risks because of the vast issues around misuse of data, relationships between, for example, robotics and humans, responsibility, accountability. The point, you'll be delighted to know, is not to go through all these changes. My institute has recently produced some great short primers explaining these changes and what they mean for the way we live and work. But the point is, this revolution in technology is akin to the 19th century industrial revolution. It is not simply material to politics, it's central. Many of those jobs that have been lost over the past decades from communities left behind actually were from technology, not trade or immigration. But all of this is going to intensify greatly. The danger, actually, is of a techlash where in the absence of a proper dialogue between change makers and policymakers, we regulate badly, miss the opportunities, and fail the challenges. And to be noted to all Western politicians, China's advances in this area, especially AI, are going to pose an enormous challenge to us. Their ambitions are very clearly set out. And as I always say to people about Chinese politicians' speeches, you might as well read them, because they actually intend to do them. Western politicians not always like that. But as Chinese, if they say it, that's what they intend to do. And in a sense, good luck to them. But the point is, we can't be laggards in this race. And meeting the challenge is going to require a substantial redesign of the state itself, what it does, how it does it, what it taxes, how it spends. The way people live, their expectations around their lives, how they balance work and recreation, what it means to have a career, what retirement looks like. All of this is likely to change in ways we cannot accurately predict, but we can predict that it will be transformative. And the risk, therefore, is clear, that some people will be qualified to handle the revolution, and some will be left stranded. This is the equity challenge for progressives. And to meet it, therefore, nations need a unifying economic and social narrative. We don't need an identity politics which divides. We can be British and European. We can come from different ethnicities or faiths but share common aspirations for our future together. Politics which polarizes, which sets people against each other, which regards the other tribe as the enemy, is destructive of the unity that in fact is going to be vital to progress and success. So, to conclude, there's no doubt in my mind there is support for a revived progressive centre. There's an obvious question: can it be done when the established parties are increasingly occupied by vocal activists from the right and left who want to vacate the centre? Well, parties could be reoccupied, and this would be the simpler course. But if not, then as I've often said, the politically homeless are not lacking commitment or conviction, and they'll find a way of building a new home. But this is actually a second-order question. The first is to agree what agenda and narrative can answer the appeal of populism and govern the future. The urgency of renewing progressive politics in this way, in a way that defeats populism rather than imitating it, is manifest. But let me end optimistically. The progressive centre is not done. All over Europe, there is an energy today coming from those who refuse to have our politics defined by division and hatred. You can see it in political parties and in groupings all over Europe today in response to this populism of left and right. In the USA, candidates in Florida and Texas recently showed how opinion can be moved by a message which unifies. So populism is not yet in retreat, but I think the strategy to drive it into retreat is becoming clearer. Now the question is whether progressive politicians are brave enough to stand up to those in our own ranks who want to fight the fire of populism with our own fire and say our job is not to burn but to build. Thank you very much.